Welcome to this week's Make It So, the Real Super Geeks Star Trek Picard Aftershow. Sorry, I've been gone a week and obviously not quite back in the groove yet. But we have a big show, lots to talk about this week. Let's start off by introducing our hosts and guests. Number one, we've got our producer, Justin Burton. How are you doing, Justin?
I am doing fantastic.
Excellent. And returning, the effervescent and always erudite Kate Stark. How are you, Kate?
I'm awake.
You're awake. That's how we like you. And also our recurring guest, Travis Litton from the Star Trek Facebook group. How are you, Travis?
It's been a very, very tedious week, and I'm very happy it's the weekend, and I'm happy to be geeking out here.
Good. I know you have lots to say about Elnor, don't we all?
Got a lot.
And so thank you to our next host who filled in for me as moderator last week, the Eyebrows of Doom himself, Ross Bullock. How are you, Ross?
Doing good. Had a great time taking the reins for a little bit.
You were great. I want that hammer. Can you please send me one?
It will be back for the SmackDown.
Oh, good. Please,
But
yes, get it out for the SmackDown. Our closing segment, of course, will be the Picard prediction SmackDown. We've got lots of new theories to revel in, old theories to smack down, and returning theories to continue to wonder about. Next up is the ever contrarian and delightful Sun Seal, aka our mascot Index.
Hello.
How are you, Sun?
I'm doing well. I can't help but notice that Shawn is sitting behind a school bus.
What, am I?
Well, you know, you have to stop school buses, even in Arizona.
I'm not sitting behind a school bus. That's the like the cement block thing on at the off ramp is what that is.
No. You are behind a school bus because the lights are flashing.
Oh no, that's my.
We hope it's a
signal.
school bus and not a. That's your turning signal.
I
Yeah,
would
that
like
was
to
our
take an
light.
opportunity to say, on
Or the
behalf
guy-
of Super Geeks, please do not do what Shawn is doing right now.
Yes. We
Especially
appreciate his dedication.
Do not
Yeah.
zoom and drive.
No
Yeah,
podcast is worth
You know
a
those
ticket
insurance.
and or your life.
Yeah, you know those insurance ad about mayhem happening. Yeah, that's fucking me. Mayhem.
That's you. All right, and of course, bringing up the rear, listed on Zoom here as iPhone, but we know him as Shawn O'Halloran. Shawn is on the road, on his way to Phoenix. Shawn, are you wearing pants?
Yeah, I am only because I'm driving, and they frown on.
Only
on
because
that
you're
thing.
driving. I was thinking that the
lying.
red lights were a cop that
If you notice,
pulled you over for not wearing pants.
for the past several weeks that he's been here, he's had an excuse for wearing pants.
Yeah,
It's
well,
almost like he's starting to wear pants and just making up excuses.
there's a lot of that.
Yeah, we have to wonder.
There's a lot to that.
We have to wonder. All right, well, let's jump in, folks, because we have a lot to cover this week. Episode 5 of Star Trek Picard, Stardust City Rag. And it begins with, well, let's face it, one of the biggest controversies we've seen in a while, and that is the rather gory death of, I guess, is it fair to call him a beloved character from Star Trek Voyager?
I'd
Well,
say so.
Kind of a-
wait a minute. With Voyager, I think it's just different degrees of less annoying. So not really. But,
There are people who have a real generational sense of identity with Voyager, so I'm not going to rain on their.
No,
I
I'm
will-
just
I
I'm
will-
just kidding. I don't hate Voyager at all.
Considering
I just
I'm
bust
one
on
of those people, I would like to say for the record that Icheb was very much a Borg humanity counterpoint to Seven.
Indeed.
He always seemed to have
Indeed.
more humanity than Seven did as a Borg.
Yeah, she had real issues with it. He seemed to glide into it pretty well in his day. But at the very beginning of this episode, we begin, as has become the norm on this show, with a flashback. This one is only 13 years before, but it takes us to a planet whose name escapes me, but I do remember the 7 domes on that planet, which I assume have some sort of meaning, being 7 other than 7 of 9, of course. But what we are most interested in is what's happening inside those domes, and that is...
They weren't the 7 domes, they were Seven's domes, if you know what I mean.
Oh, Lord.
Stop it.
So yeah, stop it. Just stop.
That's
But-
just
okay.
how you gotta remember it. It
Oh,
makes it easier.
I saw
I
a video
found it-
that somebody posted of like Easter egg things, and the name of the planet is German for to forget.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, there's lots
Well,
of...
It's
there's
also the
lots
name
of-
of the Rangers, isn't it? Of her
No, no.
Rangers? Is it,
The Rangers are based out
Rangers-
of Fenris.
Yes.
But the,
Okay,
it's a Norse-
let's see if I can find it.
It's a Norse
could've-
wolf that
Not
cannot be
listed
chained.
here.
I thought that the Rangers' name and the name of the planet were the same.
Nope,
Then-
nope, separate names.
This is what I
Is
get for only watching it once.
They're guessing.
Stand by. I'm at the
Yeah,
hotel
they're-
now, so you get to experience this whole thing.
Oh, good. Well, we'll see you
Including
as you
check-in.
check in, I suppose.
Yes.
But let's dive into the controversy, which, of course, is the death of Icheb, which is controversial on a couple of notes. One, of course, that it's the death of Icheb, and the other, that Icheb is not played by his original actor, Manu Intarayami.
Interreme.
Thank you. Who
I
Origami?
interviewed him a couple years ago for the circuit, and we spent about 15 minutes rehearsing his name so I would get it right, and I still got his first name wrong.
Oh, you got Manu wrong?
I said Manu.
Oh, okay.
He
well,
laughed it off. It was fine.
I'm sure he gets a lot of that. But
Manos.
that caused a
Hands
lot
of
of
fate.
consternation amongst fans who thought that Star Trek did him wrong by not bringing him back, by recasting the role and then killing the character. How do we feel about that? Kate, let's start with you.
Oh, I thought it was a brilliant beginning. They said so much in 3 minutes, and on top of that, it was it almost took me out of the show because it was so funny that there has been this campaign to bring the character back, and it's like they're like, okay, we'll bring him back. Bye.
Yeah.
Sold.
Yeah, but I loved the intensity of it. I loved that it was very boldly done. Even though it was a somewhat cliche scene, it made so much sense for those 2 characters, and then later in the context of the entire episode,
Indeed.
it played out beautifully in terms of characterization, plot, everything. Loved it.
What may not have been quite so cliche was the particularly gory nature of the scene, which a lot of people have complained about, up there with the F-bomb on Star Trek and other things apparently that are having Gene Roddenberry turn over in his grave. Gory enough or too gory? What do you think, Kate?
Ooh, I thought it was reasonably done. I think what made the gore much more intense was the acting related to it. I think seeing another person in pain is a lot harder than just looking at gore. But I've worked with animals a long time and dealt with a lot of nasty injuries, so maybe I'm just completely desensitized.
Well, I felt that that it really raised the stakes and provided the kind of motivation we needed to see in Seven's character later in the episode. Son, I know you don't agree with that, so why don't you weigh in? What do you think about the death of Icheb? What do you think about Manu not being cast, and where do you fall on the gory scale?
The gore, honestly, I didn't
Yep,
really
second.
see the gore, honestly.
I sure heard it.
Well, I mean, I saw the gore, but it wasn't the focus of what was going on for me.
Sure.
I mean, them ripping out his eye and then cutting it off.
Please, don't
It's
talk
like,
about
it's
that.
like random Starfleet officer removing a cybernetic eye. because at first you don't even really understand that it's Icheb. You don't.
Right.
So they literally remove this cybernetically implanted eye, and this is the future of the next generation. There could be cybernetically implanted eyes. Look at what Geordi has.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they remove this eye and literally just shear off like the DNA helix like cord things, and they go, "Where's your cortical implant?" And it's
Cortical
like,
node.
And
it's like,
and
wait,
do
is
we
this
know where the cortical node is?
yes, it's in 7.
Yep.
It's in 7. Icheb gave it up for her back in Voyager. So you win the prize for that little Easter egg. So you didn't think it was too gory, but what did you think about it happening at all, and Seven's reaction to it?
Okay, so I don't really care that it wasn't Manu, honestly. I don't care that it happened because it set up this bigger story for 7, which this was an episode written by Kirsten Byers, so that's what she does. She does character pieces.
She does 7.
She does incidental, incidental people and incidental incidents for a character's story, and this story is 7's story. This episode. What completely took me out of the entire episode was this scene. Like, this scene took me out. I could sit and watch the rest of the episode, but I was like 10 feet back from it now.
What was the reason? How come?
My child.
Really? That one phrase threw you?
Yes. And 7 has always had this dynamic of being, she's more of the father kind of parent than the mother parent. She's always loved from a distance. She's always, like, even in Voyager, she and Icheb would work together, and there was this camaraderie that was like a mother and son, but the way she conveyed that love as still being a Borg and still feeling like she didn't have her humanity, she was more of the loving father and son.
Well, but now we're looking a quarter century later, and a lot has happened since then. And remember, as we find out later in the episode, the whole reason Icheb was taken was because she had told B'Jazel, which, by the way, best name ever, B'Jazel, because she told her about Icheb. So she feels even doubly, maybe quadruply responsible for his torture and death because she's the one who basically gave him up.
Right. But it's not the words, it's not specifically the words, my child. It feels way too forced to me. I mean, it almost seems like the moment itself was touching, and then they went in and said, you know what, we need to put something else in here. So they had her go into the recording booth after the scene was filmed and go, my child, to put it in later. Like,
they ADR'd it.
Like
it's possible. We don't see your lips move, do we? I've seen it a few times, but I haven't.
I actually agree with Son on that. That, I mean, look, I get the sentiment, and I'm glad that I'm glad the attempt was made to create a feeling, a sentiment of being more than just, colleagues, friends, whatever. This was family to her. I appreciate that. But she's right that it did seem the way they did. My child, it's like, all I could think when she said my child was Kai fucking Wynn. That's all I could think of.
Well, okay, I can grant you that, but she does not own that phrase.
Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way. It felt like watching Samuel L. Jackson on Snakes on a Plane on the TV, where he's like, I'm tired of these mother-father snakes on this Monday to Friday plane.
That is the best line.
That's what it felt like to me.
Okay.
Well,
well,
okay. I'm not going to go that far, but what I will say is that I wish she had, I think instead of my child, if she had said, I think she said my son, I think it probably would have had more of an impact than My Child.
I
mean,
think that's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I think that
Well-
there'd be just as many people who
Oh,
currently think
sure,
My
of
Child was
course.
fine who'd say My Son is terrible. So
You're
there's
right,
no
you're
winning
right.
on this one.
No
Ross,
question.
where do you weigh in on My Child?
Uh, I actually
Off
felt
the
it was
top
pretty
rope.
powerful in the moment. The entire scene was just so visceral and emotional.
Literally.
I wasn't repelled. I was drawn in for the whole moment. And as the camera was panning around, you saw the uniform, you saw pieces here and there, and as soon as I saw that nose ridge, I thought,
The
oh
ridge,
no,
yeah.
oh no, please no, no God no. And then we got the full view. You saw the outline of where that implant used to be, and just the whole time I was in and there. And it didn't bother me. The My Child, that line didn't really bother me. I was just so in the moment that.
So you didn't find it too gory?
I didn't really think about it at the time.
So
I
then
know a
probably
lot of
not.
people have been very critical of both Discovery and Picard because it isn't very family friendly, and traditionally Star Trek has, more because of network television than by theme itself. I mean, look at the conspiracy, for crying out loud.
Indeed. And in fact, if you look back to the original series, it pushed boundaries on propriety and standards and practices on network television
Oh yeah.
all the time.
Right.
It was not we're a happy family just because everything was colored in candy colors, folks. I mean, it pushed the boundary on sex, on sexuality, on how much skin was shown. It was not a family show.
And how many red
Miscegenation.
shirts died? How many red shirts died? Yeah, no.
Well, there are some pretty gruesome deaths, all things considering, on the original series. I'm reminded of the Galileo 7 when the guy's got the big arrow sticking out of his back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the
fun.
the one that affected me the most from TOS was, I can't remember the name of the episode or the super entity of the week that was in it, but he turned 2 crewmen into salt blocks and then
By
just
any
crushed
other
Oh,
them.
and then
name.
crushed them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
called
there
by
was
any
the
other name.
Andromedan.
Yeah. But it didn't really take me out of the scene. I guess in my mindset, I was kind of prepared for something pretty intense. I didn't
Mhm.
expect it to be that intense. I didn't expect it to be that gruesome. But the line didn't really take me out. Upon reflecting upon it later, it maybe felt a little different. But in my first viewing, I was all in.
See, that's the
Travis,
thing.
do you think this
I
is the
was-
right way to start the show?
Well, it certainly had an impact on me. If you're asking for my personal experience, I'll be honest, I really don't care about bloody, gory scenes. I'm not going to raise hell about it, but it wasn't something I particularly cared about. But I was squirming when they showed them just straight up pulling the eye out. I was like, don't show that! Don't show that! I was.
They sure
Very
did. Do you know how that character was listed in the credits for the show? She was called Chop Doc.
Ooh.
I know.
And the way she was just casually, even friendly, talking to him as she was dissecting him. Where's your cortical node, buddy? Good.
Do you know what it reminded me of? Those two doctors from Nip Tuck.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
it kind of reminded me of that EMH from Equinox, the one that was just like, I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want.
Yeah, but he was more cold. He was just, all right, this is what you told me to do. I'm gonna do it now. She was enjoying the whole thing.
Yeah.
She took delight in his screams and in his pain,
Oh,
and in the
well.
prospect of invasively carving him up to look for different pieces.
Yeah.
Well, no.
He was a monster.
What he's talking about, it's not it wasn't a EMS. It was when the doctor got his ethical subroutines were removed. In Equinox Part 2 is what he's talking
Yeah.
about, and he just seemed like like Mengele. You know, I mean, that's, you know, just that's what Justin's referring to. And so yeah, I mean, that was pretty nasty. As was this, I mean, you know, I want to get. I'm not particularly surprised that they recast the character at all, just because, you know, Manu has kind of set himself up over the past couple of years as not being really the kind of guy I think the franchise wants to associate with anymore. They put it this way. I go to Trek conventions every single year, and this dude's paying for his own ticket now. Let's put it that way. He wears a general admission wristband like everybody else. No joke at all.
Yep, that's how I met him.
Let's move. Yeah, let's move ahead to and talk a little bit about the portrayal of Seven of Nine, starting in this scene. She is listed in the credits as a special guest star, even though she appears as part of the main cast in all of the publicity materials. There's an interesting listing. We'll talk about that a little bit more, about the implications of that later in this episode. But let's talk about her. There's been a lot of chatter online about people who do not like the version of Seven that they see.
Oh my God.
25 years later.
Okay, who all remembers the fact that there's been vigilantes in Star Trek since the freaking original series days? Raise your hand, please.
How
Vigilantes.
long has it been since Endgame?
Yeah.
How long
it's
has it been?
25 years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How long? And
Oh, 20.
didn't people say the same thing about Picard in the first episode?
Yes.
Did they expect no time to have passed and for people to just stay the same for decades?
Yep.
And
I
these
was in a-
people
They
kill
feel the
me
same way about
in
Luke
their
Skywalker,
complaints.
too.
And I mean, they kill me in their complaints. And they act like, well, no time is supposed to pass. I'm like, are you just?
Well, let's focus on Seven specifically here. Kate, did you find the changes in her demeanor, personality, the way she talks, the way she drinks, justified dramatically given the amount of time since we last saw her?
Yeah, I think in Voyager, she was always on the trajectory to reclaim as much of her humanity as possible. We just saw her at the very Borg end of the spectrum, but given another, 10, 15, 20 years, you could expect her to develop, more of a varied affect instead of that Borg monotone. And you could expect her to pick up more human mannerisms. And I especially liked that she'd taken on kind of the role of a vigilante, because it really pointed back towards her Borg past of being so driven by a desire for order. And then she comes into this completely chaotic environment, and she's got this drive for order, but then it might also be merged with the Starfleet ideals she learned from Janeway and the Doctor and the rest of the Voyager crew.
Yeah, I felt like there was no small amount of Janeway and the Doctor in the way she was portrayed, and even a little bit of Chakotay, if you think about it.
Hey-o.
In the way she seems now.
Who basically is a vigilante, Chakotay.
Yeah, I mean, she was around
Yeah.
people who were vigilantes, and him especially.
Guys,
so
I just want to let you know, I'm going to cut you off for 2 seconds because I've got everything, my studio set up, my hotel room for all this, and I will be back in a few. Bye-bye.
All right, we'll see you when
Bye.
you return. In the meantime, let's move ahead to Stardust City, 2 weeks before what I guess we would call the present day. And that is where we see the inside of the bar. We meet Bjayzl, Mr. Vip. I know it's Vup, but I'm saying it the way Picard did. And interestingly, the song that's playing, the piano player in that bar is in fact a ragtime song. It's the song Solace by Scott Joplin, which I thought was a nice touch. Anybody else, by the way, think Bjayzl look a lot like Marina Sirtis?
I've seen a lot.
Now that you mention it.
So here we find in this episode the first super explicit connection between the kind of work Bruce Maddox is doing and the ex-Borgs. but Jazel sort of represents the intersection between those two pieces of work. We've sort of speculated on this since the beginning of the show, but now we actually see two characters, each representing that, you know, that aspect of artificial life, and turns out one is funding the other. So does that change your perspective, anybody, on the connection between what we're finding out about the Borg and what we're seeing with the synths?
The implication of what's going on here is staggering to me. We saw the artifact. We saw what they're doing with the X-Borg on the artifact, reclaiming them and everything else. It never occurred to me that there might be a black market for Borg pieces as well, funded by people who kidnap and dissect X-Borg as well. That's that, and not only that, what does that say about the state of the Borg in this timeline? If there is a market for it, that means that there's a supply, that there are potentially a lot of X-Borg out there, not just the ones from the artifact, but who knows where else.
That's what I'm thinking we're going to see. That Voyager had a pretty large impact of the events of Endgame. Probably had a larger impact than what we had thought originally. If there's much, I mean, you know, I didn't want to think about it being that way, but if you look at it with this latest development, it's starting to look that way because they wouldn't be screwing around with the Borg like this if they're still active.
Not only that, the proficiency and efficiency of the chop shop doctor from before. I mean, she's
she's clearly done it before.
Not only that, the pieces of Borg that are hung up like carcasses at a butcher shop.
Mm-hmm.
She's done it before recently.
Yeah.
As far back as
chilling.
13 years ago. There's at least 13 years of chopping going on here.
And not to mention, it's also going on the artifact.
Yes.
Sure.
What the hell is going on in this universe right now?
And you can imagine that, you know, at the end of Endgame, that there may have been any number of Borg cubes around, you know, the quadrants that were cut off with the destruction of the transwarp conduits. So
This goes back
there
to,
is, in fact, yeah. Go ahead, son.
Well, this goes back to what is it, Unimatrix Zero?
Mm-hmm.
When they start rebelling against the Borg Queen, the love interest for Seven in that episode says they were on the edge of the Beta Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he started taking control of that cube.
Mm-hmm.
And they were basically going to fight the Borg. It was basically going to be a Borg civil war. Well, then you have the events of Endgame, in which future Admiral Janeway infects herself into the Borg Queen with another virus of some description, which we've seen time and time again to fight the Borg with. It's getting kind of old hat here, but apparently this one
it's effective.
This one takes the Borg Queen. Yeah, we have no idea how this affects the collective as a whole, because we don't see the ramifications afterward thereof. Now we have an entire industry built on dissecting Borg, and not just Borg, but if you listen to the dialogue, there's a new kind of Borg as well. A weaker kind of Borg that doesn't have the same kind of implants that classic Borg from the Delta Quadrant have.
Where are you getting that from?
That was the conversation that was had between that Vip and Vajazel, I believe.
No, that was Picard, his comical French capturer persona, saying that she's not one of the new ones.
Right. It means she would, because she was assimilated as a child.
That's what I inferred as
they were
well.
presumably working on all of the Borg all the time, and so since she'd been assimilated as a child, she had more stuff in her, and they went through quite a comprehensive list of, even now, having had a lot of that stuff taken out, she still had a lot of implants inside her, which I thought was interesting.
Right.
But I
one
don't think
possibility.
I don't think that's a category of a weaker Borg. It's just that some were
Well, I'm not-
assimilated
no,
later
no,
in their lives than her.
I'm not saying that it's a category of weaker Borg. I mean, just that that it's possible we have a new kind of Borg where the implants are
How is that
much
new? It's just a newer or older. It's not, I mean, it's not a different kind of Borg. It's the same Borg
You'll
at
let
a
me
different stage of
finish.
development. Please do, because I don't understand.
The Borg are a technology-based race that bases their technology off assimilating other species to promote its own self, its own numbers. As
Perfection.
as a technological based race, they would naturally find more efficient and more clean and less invasive ways to completely and utterly assimilate a being, meaning fewer implants.
Oh, I don't think you can make that statement at all. I don't think you can make that claim at all. There's nothing to support that. That's a supposition you're making.
That
have
goes
you
on to
seen any evidence
SmackDown.
of fewer implants than before? I mean, I was with you up to the point where you said fewer implants. I would see more efficient ways of assimilation, but the idea that there'd be fewer implants, I don't think I've seen anything that would support that.
Let's add that to the predictions list.
Well, it's not really a prediction, it's an observation, but I mean, am I missing something? Has anyone else seen evidence like
Hey,
this?
he's back.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know about whether we've got another type of Borg running around, although, a lot can happen in the couple of decades since we last saw him. But
Sure.
I do think that the showrunners have opened an interesting door, which is, where are these Borg components going and what are they being used for?
Yes.
Because we haven't
That's a
seen
very good
any
question.
non-Borg using Borg tech yet. So it leaves this mystery of who's buying and why.
Yeah. No, I think that's very on point, and we should certainly keep track of that. Yeah,
We
Ross.
see the supply. Where's the demand?
Where's the demand? Yeah, good question.
Federation.
I don't think anyone's building new Borg, or I think they're looking for ways to integrate it into existing technology or upgrade existing technology. Again, that's my supposition, but eventually that's where I think you'd see that kind of technology end up. Okay, so let's move on to Free Cloud, as we see our motley crew head that way. And the first thing that they see are a bunch of targeted ads,
We're forgetting about
which I thought was, pardon?
We're forgetting about
Maddox. The first
Well,
time we've
yeah,
seen him in the show.
Sure.
well,
yes,
I mean,
we saw
there's
it the first time
also
we've seen the show, but
the conversation between Seven and Picard that happened before.
I'm
the
getting
ads
there,
as well.
folks. I'm getting there. The Maddox thing, I was going to save more conversation about that until later, when there's actually more sort of meat on the bones to chew on. All right. As far as I think what we've seen in this scene is that we're seeing what I mentioned earlier about the first kind of explicit connection between synths, artificial life forms, and Borg technology and people who are former Borg. So, and Maddox certainly being at the center of that intersection. So, there's a lot more to talk about on that, and we will.
Another recast that isn't causing a controversy.
Oh no, there are people complaining about that one too.
Yeah. Well, they complain.
Not to the same degree.
But
they
Carlos,
put it worse.
but Carlos wants to talk about the ads, guys.
All right. As far as the ads are concerned, they had a real missed opportunity here. They should have shown Quark's ad from loved Quarks. Quarks is fun. Don't walk.
Don't walk
Come right now.
around.
Don't walk. Run.
Oh God, I totally
Spin.
forgot about that.
They
I
love
thought it was an interesting observation on what we live through now, where when you're browsing and sites know who you are and know what you've bought before, and everyone
Exactly.
gets something said
Except
to them that's in
except-
keeping, except of
right,
course
Elnor.
Elnor.
How come I didn't
And
get one?
that is like I've seen so many people like saying like, oh, they treat Elnor like shit on this show because he's the only one that doesn't get an ad, and he's like always like
He has no
so
social media
behind them.
footprint.
It's like he's been living in seclusion his entire life.
He has.
Why do you think he didn't get an ad? The system doesn't know
Yeah,
him.
he doesn't have any internet footprint whatsoever. That's what
This is
it
his
gets
first
down to.
time off of his birth
Exactly.
world ever,
It's a
Ever.
blank slate. Blank slate.
where he lived
I
with
thought it was
Luddites.
It was absolutely cute. I
Yeah, it
was
was
laughing
adorable.
like a little girl.
And something we see repeated a couple more times in the show, which we'll get there. So the next thing that we see is that conversation between Picard and Seven, in which we discover explicitly that she is what we, a lot of people jumped to the conclusion last week correctly, that she herself is a member of the Fender Strangers. And she goes on in her little tete-a-tete with Picard, in which he first criticizes her for being a vigilante, and then says, well, I guess admits there's nothing, that chaos would ensue without the Rangers doing what they're doing.
You're taking the law into your own hands. What law?
What
What
law?
law?
Exactly.
Picard's like, good point.
That was a good scene.
Yeah, it was a great scene. It was it pointed to a familiarity between these two characters that we've obviously never seen before, but it's not a close familiarity. Know what I mean? What did you guys make of their relationship as you could see it in this first scene?
Well,
It was go ahead.
Shawn first, then Justin.
okay. Here's the thing: is that what I count between the two? We had discussed this before. They have they share a common bond of both being humans who were assimilated and disconnected from the collective. They share that together. So how much interaction they've had before is hinted at, but not really ever dug deep. But I guess when she would have been in the collective at the same time that he was. So
Yeah.
they share a link in that regard. And it's I was expecting a more confrontational attitude based on everything, all the interviews and things leading up to this than there really was. They just have two competing agendas. I particularly like the part where it's like we just talked about how he said, you're taking the law in your hands, and she says, what law? And he says, good point, basically is what he says. It was kind of like, it was almost knee-jerk for Picard to wag his finger at her. And then like the contemporary curmudgeon Picard kicked into character when she just kind of leveled him with a what law. He's like, well, you're right. So it's I think we've seen a lot of that too, is that it's his structure of who he is, being Captain Picard, being Admiral Picard, being Starfleet, yet it still hangs around with him. He can't even really help that. Even in everything he does today, which is completely antithetical to what his role, what would be in a hierarchical structure like Starfleet is. He's rogue now, but he still has that Starfleet in him.
This is why he can smell Starfleet on Rio.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Did anyone else
smells
anyone else
peaty
get-
with a hint of moss?
Did anyone else get the vibe that he was like recruiting her, like actively recruiting
Yes.
her in the same?
Yes.
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 another vibe I got was that she was giving a very subtle jab to Picard, because one thing she explicitly says to Picard is like, my job is helpless. I mean, like, well, here's the actual quote. I should probably just
It's
pull it up.
impossible. It's
She
hopeless.
says,
Hopeless, it's
ranging is my
exhausting.
job. It's and the only thing
Would
worse
be giving up.
would be giving up. And that is exactly what
Oh.
Picard did all
Mhm.
those years
And it's
ago.
exactly the
I
line,
can't help but that is
and it's
just a,
exactly the line that he uses to recruit her explicitly when she asks him, "What are you doing out here, Picard?" And he says, basically, helping someone that otherwise would be given up on, and that's when she asks for the second shot of bourbon.
Yeah,
Speaking of,
I really think we're going to be seeing more of her. I don't think this is the last we see of Seven.
Well, I was going to bring this up because the week before, did anybody watch the Ready Room the week before?
Yeah.
He specifically, the actor that plays Rios, he specifically says that I would expect to see more of her. So, I mean,
Well,
you can't
she
run
gave
upset
him her
it.
card.
yeah.
She gave him her card. So
And
Yep.
I gotta say, it's nice to see after 20 years, Seven has finally learned to hold her liquor.
exactly.
Last time we
Right.
see her drink
I
anything,
had
it was
a-
a glass of Synthale champagne, and she got hammered off of one.
We
See,
are
that
as
was-
one.
That was going to be my joke earlier about her personality. It's like, I blame the doctor. You can only stuff so much sugar in a former Borg before she goes nuts. How many slices of cheesecake did she have because of the doctor?
A whole cake?
Exactly.
That was funny.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, let's move ahead to the scene on the bridge between Rafi and Rios. We get a quick shot of Rafi looking up some guy, at this point we don't know who he is, named Gabriel Wong, who's from Mars, lived in Hellas Planitia. I did the screen grab and the pinch to zoom to find that out.
That's
But-
the location where NASA found that Starfleet Delta looking
Yes,
formation.
the Starfleet symbol. Yes, that's right. So interestingly, I've noticed that they've done this in a scene like this in every episode so far, where two characters are talking about a third character, and that's how we get the exposition. In this case, about Picard having been a Borg, who Seven of Nine was, why she's famous, that she's from the Delta Quadrant. All of these things. I called it the Rios and Rafi exposition show, TM. And watch it. You'll see a scene like this in I think almost every episode where they're filling in backstory for people who are new to the franchise. Anyone else notice that?
Yes, I've picked up on
Yeah,
that.
I definitely noticed it.
I think it's an effective tool because it accomplishes two things. First and foremost, like as you pointed out, it gives us the exposition, but at the same time, it gives us a connection to the characters. Is what it does, and makes them more relatable to us in general, as opposed to
The characters you're referring to being Rios and Rafi,
It doesn't matter whoever's doing
Picard
it.
and
Yeah, whoever.
well, they're the two who are doing it in this case, but
in this case, right? But it's not the first time it's happened so far this series, and it's been
Right.
different characters have done it. And I think it serves the purpose of making them more, making them people as opposed to just characters doing things. So I like it.
And
It gives it-
also,
I will play. I'll play devil's advocate and say that to this episode, it kind of felt pretty forced, not as effective for me. I don't know. I think they just repeated the Seven of the Borg from the Delta Quadrant, or I almost forgot that Picard was a Borg too, and I think they just did a little too much repetition for me, because I feel like they just explained Seven's origins twice or three times. It just felt repetitive to me, I guess.
I'm gonna say that I think this is. I want to point out another complaint people had, and that is, why isn't she called Annika Hansen? This was happening before the episode even aired, and
we find out, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, but I think there is a more, from a production aspect of this, is that you have to remember this show wasn't made just for Star Trek fans. This show is meant to bring in people who have a passing experience with Star Trek, who would know Seven of Nine as a character, but wouldn't.
Yeah, I think
know.
that's the whole point of the exposition.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
And to fill in the blanks for people with a passing experience, with a passing experience with Star Trek, which is why they didn't call her Annika Hansen, because I think Annika Hansen is mentioned 3 times in Voyager at all. So I mean, but they would know who Seven of Nine is more likely.
And
so I think that's so. Travis, to your concern, I think that's the reason they did it. For us being Trek nerds, yes, it gets a little redundant. But for people who don't really know all the backstory, they just know she was bored, she's not now. I think it serves a greater purpose.
I think it
makes it more accessible.
I'm glad you touched base on that.
Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched base on that because that's exactly it. Because we got all these new people that are coming in the franchise, and they may not, know the complete backstory. Well, what happened? Why is she like this? What are those implants? What's going on here? These fillers, they may be corny as hell for us who have been fans of the show, but for people coming in, it's needed information.
We also got some new information from the scene with giving us a little background about Seven of Nine's time as a Fenris Ranger. Yeah. Apparently, she's infamous. Mm-hmm. That she is well known and very effective as a ranger. So that's an interesting tidbit, I thought. And
she is a literal gunslinger.
I also got a real kick out of seeing Rios in awe.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's really that impressed by much. And
starstruck.
He was. He was.
I think that's what was being conveyed by that repetition. Just him absorbing this information. So,
and not just
who's in there,
and not just starstruck with Seven, but also with the way Picard is receiving her. Because remember, he's starstruck with Picard as well, even though he tries not to appear that way.
Yeah,
but
he was all like, "Oh, wait a minute, who is she again? Oh, that explains it."
It's like she was called into the principal's office,
Yeah.
And because that's sort of like the regard with which he holds him, like him having that study, reconstructed on the ship. It's a big deal to be in there, just like it used to be in his ready room,
Meanwhile, Raffi's just drinking it all in and imagining what kind of drama is going on in there.
Right.
Oh, indeed. It was a good scene. I like the way Rios interacts with Raffi, and particularly the way we've seen him interact with Jurati, I think is significant. Anyone else get kind of a flirtation vibe between Jurati and Rios?
During the ad scenes,
a very slight bit, a little bit.
He's coaching her on is really cute.
Yeah.
I kind of got what I've equated him to Han Solo before, and I've equated him also to Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly, but he is a little bit. He seems to be more sympathetic to his crew members than either one of those characters were in the beginning, at least. Solo eventually warms up to everybody. He's everybody's loyal friend, but
he's Wolverine to Rose.
Rios. Yeah, there you go. Exactly right. And so Rios, after they all board the ship, after they're all part of the team, he seems genuinely concerned with his and cares about his new crew members, despite the insanity that's following them. So
okay, so moving on, we see a little bit more backstory revealed in Jurati's viewing of the holovid, recollection of her and Maddox making cookies, which was cute. I like the whole notion of replicating the ingredients but doing the baking yourself. I thought, and him, what was the line he had? Something like, there's an alchemy to it. which I thought was cute. But was anyone else bothered by the fact when the time came to actually try the cookies, they each took like the tiniest nibble ever? Like, does anyone eat cookies like that?
Welcome to acting.
Yeah, I mean that's
Actually
that's
eat
typical.
food.
That's typical. I mean, do you ever? It's like when somebody says, "Can I get you a drink?" They get them a drink, and they either don't drink it all, they just hold it, or they take one sip and that's it, and then they leave the drink. And, it's the same type of thing.
Or it's an obviously empty cup.
Yeah,
that's the one that gets me. Is whenever they bring coffee, like from Starbucks or something, in a show, you can tell that thing's empty. There's like no weight to it when they're holding it.
There's no weight. Crazy. Yeah, there's no weight.
Or they just upend it and like press it against their face.
Or when you're seeing a big dinner scene, you may see the characters take one or two bites, but for the most entirety of the scene of like a big long dining table and them eating, it's them just chewing like they're eating and then having conversation in the chewing.
Unless you're a Klingon, and then you got a scene with a mouthful of gak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, the reason for that is because they're shooting a lot of different shots from it, and if the tube disappears, they lose continuity between one shot and the other. So that's the reason why. Okay.
It also doesn't help if you make your actor's stomach burst by them actually eating food.
Exactly. A lot of times on a lot of sets, people will chew, but as soon as they call cut, they spit it out so that they don't get full. I wanted to take a quick...
I was going to say that Myrna Sirtis, she always talked about on the show, on Next Generation, how she did not like milk chocolate at all. She was a dark chocolate fan, and they'd be shoving milk chocolate down her throat all the time. And
chocolate pudding.
Right. Well, she said as soon as they hit cut, she would just spit it into a bucket. Is what she said she did, because she couldn't.
That's what the professionals do. Okay, so I wanted to take a little bit of time and go on a little bit of a tangent away from the show and talk a bit about some of the reactions I've been reading in a lot of reviews and a lot of fan comments out there, and it's just on this one point. There's a lot of complaints about the show moving slowly, and in particular, I was reading one critic who's talking about how the pace of last week's episode was so slow and that not much happened. We got Elnor and Seven's return, and that's pretty much all that happened in the thing. They called it an uneven story flow, particularly by contrast with this week's episode, which is like bam, 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 action. Do you think that holds up as a criticism? Kate, what do you think? Start us off.
I get the impression that this show, they're moving all of their pieces into position, and once they've got everything where they want it, it's going to go like a rocket. That's just kind of my general impression. I definitely see how people could get the impression that it is slow, but part of me wonders if that isn't because we're very accustomed to fast-paced television, fast dialogue, a lot of fast edits, and a lot of action. So that when you get these deeper character moments that are really relying on you to watch every element of the scene at once for visual cues and the like, and kind of piece together the story yourself, it might seem a whole lot slower than it perhaps is.
Travis, what do you think?
Well, me, I'm a character guy, so I'm very much invested in the characters, what they're thinking, what's going on. And so when I see people complaining from this aspect of, oh, it's moving too slow, it's so boring, I am just thinking like, you are the same fucking people who say that there is too much pew-pew in Discovery, so just sit down and enjoy the fact that there is actually like a very, I'm just really invested in these characters. I like how their stories are being told to us. I like how their relationships are forming, and I very much enjoy the approach that they're taking. I don't mind that there's some more laid back episodes. If I had to lay out an episode that I thought was probably the weakest, I'd probably say it was number 2. But even then, I thought it ended like pretty quick, and that tells me that I'm having fun. So
Exactly. You know, the people that are complaining about this, it's not a typical Star Trek episode. It's supposed to be a big, gigantic story arc. It's not a typical episode. It's not every single thing is going to be fast paced. It's all connected. Chill. It's coming.
I mean, I'm
Yeah, it's
also
like the
kind of
X-Files.
reminded.
It's all connected.
I am reminded of my criticisms of The Mandalorian almost. If you guys remember that,
I was about to say the same thing.
I was playing devil's advocate. I said, like, these episodes feel very formulaic. They're not boring,
I
but
said the
it's
same
just,
thing.
it's
We
just
did.
it's very much like, okay, where's the story
then
going?
episode
And then
5
those last
happened.
two,
Yeah.
then those last two came along, and I was like, okay, you guys got me.
Yeah,
Like,
we were all complaining there for a minute, and then and then it just smacked us.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that after seeing the first three, I had, of course, we know that I saw the first three all at once.
Yes,
okay?
we know, Shawn.
we know you.
We remember. We
Have I
remember.
mentioned that I was at the premiere in Hollywood? Have I
Yes,
mentioned
and that
that?
you were
Every
sitting behind Marina
single
Sirtis.
all the
time.
time.
He gave me
yes, we
my
know.
phone when I dropped it. Okay, so but my point in this is that
Did that really
I-
happen?
It really did. I'm a dope, and I dropped my phone, and she handed it to me because I had to get up and pee in the middle of episode 2. So yes, I'm not proud of it, but I did get my phone handed to me in the process. But okay, so my concern was, to be honest with you, I thought the building up, the first 3 episode build up, the 3-chapter build up for establishing this our motley crew and getting our crew together, I thought that was done at episode 3. And then episode 4 gave us the exact same thing. It wasn't until the last scene where our adventure story really started, and that was with the fight, the space battle at the end. And that's when I really think it started. And that was my only concern. It's like, it's back to what we discussed about The Mandalorian, and that is, we only got 10 episodes here. I'm getting a little concerned, but this episode changed that entirely. I mean, this is okay. Now we're into the adventure part, folks. Now we're getting answers, and we're right in the thick of it. And the other side of this too is that I noticed I completely lost my train of thought. Get back to me on that one, folks.
I will. I'm going to add one other thing there. Oh, go ahead, son.
I have the largest smile on my face because I think you've all missed the point here.
Elaborate.
Picard in TNG Picard made a very interesting observation about Romulans. Does anybody remember what it was?
No.
well, there's probably a
He
ton
made
of
lots of them, but
Interacting with Romulans is like playing chess, and the first half of chess is always a slow setup, and then the pieces start to fall.
Hmm?
We're
I don't
getting,
think-
What
I don't think-
episode is that?
then
That was the
we're,
defector.
we're getting the pieces starting to fall
sure.
in Picard.
I don't think any of us missed that point. I mean, I think that's what we were all just saying.
Yeah,
Maybe she's addressing
the
the
point of
people who are
Picard.
saying it's too slow.
Oh, I know what I was getting,
right,
but no,
okay.
okay, which leads me back to my lost train of thought. Here's where I think this argument though is silly, because the same people who are complaining about it being too slow now are the same people who are complaining in the first 2-3 episodes about it's too fast paced, it's too action, it's J.J. Abrams, Star Trek again, lens flares, blah blah blah. They now have this complaint that now it's too slow. It's like, make up your mind. I mean, you know, there was plenty in the first 3 episodes, plenty of action in the first 3 episodes to make up for any kind of issues with establishment. My only concern, like I said, was when we get to the 4th episode and we're still adding crew members, and that was my only concern. My fears have been assuaged after this episode entirely. So I'm cool with it. I'm comfortable.
I'm convinced that a lot of the complaints that Picard and also Discovery is getting is that these people refuse to accept that this is a different kind of television storytelling.
Yeah.
These shows are not
Mhm.
90s primetime sci-fi. These
It's the
are not
biggest
an
issue.
extension of TNG, Voyager, and DS9.
Right.
I
This
want more
is a
episodic.
different kind of television, a different kind of storytelling. And they just want the nostalgia track. They want more TNG, DS9, and Voyager.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
don't like it, and they want it to be something different. But no matter how much you want something, it's not going to change what it is.
They want the
Right,
Orville.
and I would like to point out that the episodic nature of Star Trek in the late 80s into the 90s is a byproduct of television from that era. Very simply. In fact, that era, the problem with it is, and the reason why the decline in Star Trek actually started 10 years before Enterprise aired its last episode, is simply because that format stayed throughout Star Trek while it changed on every other dramatic presentation of television, because that's what happens. The format changes, and there's a very simple reason for this, and that is, and I hate
Rick Berman.
No, it's not Rick Berman so much. It's that there's the reason that it changes is because I hate to break this to Star Trek fans, but Star Trek is not made for Star Trek fans. Okay, there are far too little of us to make an impact in ratings and to make an impact in viewership and revenue generation. In the 90s, when Star Trek Next Generation was at its peak, it was getting 14 million viewers per week. Out of those 14 million viewers, only, and this is documented, 2% would be considered fans. Those are people that not just watch the show on a weekly basis, but also invest their money into merchandising, novels, book, things like that. Just 2%. Look, 2% of your viewing audience cannot sustain a franchise. I'm sorry. It's great that we're here, but the show has to be made to appeal to a contemporary audience for whatever that contemporary audience enjoys watching. And right now, this type of this long form, novelistic type of storytelling is what contemporary audiences enjoy. This is not an episode of the week like CSI, like Law and Order. Which is shows that are geared for a much older audience, the same audience that enjoyed that in the 80s and 90s. This is meant for a contemporary audience. So it's not even a matter about that they're making this completely to go against what was done in the 90s. They're making it to appeal to that other 98% of the contemporary audience of 2020 is what it comes down to.
And
Okay, we're gonna move ahead. We're moving ahead, folks.
We could do a whole show on this subject.
Yeah, we really can.
We don't need to go on too many tangents. Okay, so moving into now the scenes on Free Cloud where Rios goes down. This, by the way, is Jonathan Frakes' second episode that he's directed of this show. And in this one, he employs a really interesting intercutting between, what's happening in the present on Free Cloud and their preparations before everyone goes down. Did that work for you? Did you think was it confusing at all? Did you think it was an interesting way to present those scenes?
Did he do this in the other episode he directed too? Because I recall this being done before.
It was done
Well, it's not
It was done in episode 3.
Okay, was that the episode he directed?
No, I think last week was the one that the first one
yeah.
I directed.
Okay,
Episode 4.
I thought it was effective. It took me a second to catch on what was going on, and then once I did, I was like, oh, I like this. This works. This cuts out the middleman. And it was very much like Ocean's 11 type.
Yes,
of
I was going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, good.
It was so it made it a lot more fun, and Rios' pimp outfit just made my day.
As Agnes put it, you're killing it.
Yeah, exactly.
You need a feather in the hat.
That was the best line. It needs a feather.
and the fact that
And
that
it
came
comes
from
in
seven
number
made it
7.
all the more hilarious.
Yep, exactly.
There were some great little funny moments in this. Interestingly, I think they sailed over the heads of some people who were like, Picard would never dress up as something so patently corny and ridiculous. And it's like,
Dixon.
Did they-
Boy, here we
did
go.
I
they not
think Travis
hear
has a
what
rant
Rafi
about
said about that? What?
I
What
think
the-
Travis has a rant about this.
Do you want to jump in here, Travis, with your rant of the week?
All right,
Did I get the
so
popcorn?
one of the worst pieces of criticism that I have legit ever seen is based on this, and it's very much based on Picard's French accent. I kid you not. All right, I'm going to read you the comments here. I'm going to read you the comments there. I shouldn't. I'm not going to say the guy's name. I won't give him that. But he says, "I'm glad more people are offended by the episode as the previous episode's poor logic writing and general plot have annoyed me. Patrick Stewart's insult to French people is one of the many low points, and there is no revenge in Star Trek." That's the first comment he said. His second was, "French Picard is the new low of the show, along with everything else in this show." A third comment I came across by this same guy was in response to another comment. I don't know if you guys know who Gary Brown is. He's a guy he shows a bunch of fan films in the Big Trek group. He was expressing his appreciation of the show, and then Rich replied to him, Picardie offended Star Trek fans and all of France, you mean? He's better than that, and he knows it, having too much at our expense. And I was just like, are you fucking kidding me right now with this shit? Like, the episode itself goes out of its way to explain that these guys are dressing up as people who are meant to be flamboyant,
Absurd.
meant to be larger than life,
Right.
meant to be, like cartoonish. I mean,
Right.
CBS captioning straight up labels Picard's French accent as cartoonish.
Yep.
Yes.
So
But see, here's the
it's
thing, you
not
can't tell 'em
meant to
this.
be. It's not meant to be this like stereotypical offensive accent that Picard is doing, especially since Picard has shown earlier in the series that he has a legit French accent.
It's
And
not
I mean, like,
good.
this guy is just like, oh, he is just being so insensitive to the French people. And I am just sitting here like, you are probably one of the same people that completely just forgets about the fact that the next generation stereotypes the Irish for a cheap laugh, a portrayal that actually bugged Colmini. And when I criticized this, you probably came to me and was just like, oh, it's just a joke. It's all in good fun. Can't you just laugh? And like, I actually got called a snowflake for pointing this out. Like, it's like, oh, I'm Irish and I have a sense of humor. You're just a snowflake. Get fucked. Like, just get fucked.
Get
Like,
I am so glad
that is
I'm
some of
Okay.
the
from that
worst
group.
criticism I have ever heard about this show. The fact that
Hey.
they are scraping the bottom of the barrel to just try and find something to nitpick about this show. I am sorry
Travis,
I rambled.
I
I know you want to talk, Shawn.
No, I'm Travis. Listen, I want to let you know, I feel your concern. I just want to let you know that there is a brand new product out there that is meant to solve all this fan butthurt. And I'm gonna put it up on screen here.
Oh, butthurt self.
It's actually this right here. So yeah, that usually works pretty well.
Desitin.
Yeah.
Time
So.
to load up, folks.
And look, do you see how you can get a 4-ounce pack of 6 here to take with you? It's great. It
Oh,
really
that's
is
actually
worth it.
really, really good. I go through a lot of that.
Well, and as you saw on there, you can put it as a dash button. So you
Yeah,
can get it like
absolutely.
that.
You can go subscribe and save on it, which makes it even better.
I know.
That will help a lot of butthurt people.
Okay.
I speak from experience. We have 3 kids.
I have
Yep,
to
same.
ask, what the hell was that?
What?
Desitin?
Desitin? It's for diaper rash. It's an ointment for diaper
Okay.
rash.
It's a
Okay.
zinc
It's
ointment.
Butt cream.
it's a parent of a newborn's best friend. Let me tell you.
Okay, as yeah,
That
someone who
and-
has no children. Yeah, that okay. I
Yeah.
did not.
No, I was
Now we're up
trying
to speed.
name both there.
Okay, Travis, I'm throwing another softball at you, which are my 3 favorite Elnor lines, which all occurred in this scene,
Yes.
the prep scene. The one where he realizes it's a lie.
Everybody's
Second
behaving
one.
like somebody else.
The one where
Except me.
he tries to imitate Rios and goes aguardiente,
I can't. I
which
have no
is
idea what that means.
mispronounced, but in the cutest possible way. And of course, when he sulks off to the
I
line,
don't know how to be.
I don't know how to not be Elnor. I
I
thought that was
Just
adorable.
be Elnor, an Elnor that doesn't.
We should have
talk.
a weekly segment, Elnor's cutest moment from each episode.
Oh, if you're gonna
Elnor
do
is the
that,
baby Yoda.
man.
Elnor has become the baby Yoda of this show, is what it comes down to.
Elnor
A
is
very
my
Yoda
favorite
could
competent
kill
character
someone
right
with a
now.
sword.
Or a phaser. Did you see how quickly he grabbed those 2 phasers from the security
and it's
people
funny
on Free Cloud?
because I was thinking to myself for a brief moment, because you kind of pointed that out. He seemed very innocent and very, very cute. And then I'm thinking to myself, does he stand a chance on that? And then I said, wait a minute, he's a fucking ninja. Of course he'll be fine. What are we worried about? What am I worried about here?
And because he can only tell the truth, he's Mr. Vup is no match for him.
Right, exactly.
Speaking of which, they went out of their way to point out in that scene between Vup and Rios about how, as a beta Anarian, he has 1,253 olfactory sensors that can tell whether or not someone is telling the truth. And I thought it was really interesting how they made a big point of that with Rios. But when Picard was talking as the flamboyant French pirate dude, he went on at great length about Seven being having been assimilated, and how he described her as being defiled, and that and went on at length about just how her humanity had been ripped away, and I realized he believes what he's saying about her at some level that would make it past Vup.
That's what makes the final scene of this episode so powerful between him and Seven.
Yes. He definitely. I totally think he believes it because he believes.
So that's what happened to him. That's
exactly.
He's speaking
right.
as much
It's
about
that-
himself as he is about
himself.
Seven.
Right. It's that shared bond. And of course, if we go back, if you really want to just remember the last scene of Best of Both Worlds 2, when he's sitting with Troy, and then the next episode, because that's very powerful, that last scene. The next episode, Brothers, and how much the man was violated through this. And I always got the feeling that there was so much more to that they never really addressed in Next Generation. Even in First Contact, it was, they didn't really, they showed Picard pissed off about it, but not like he was emotionally damaged by this. He was just an angry dude, and like Captain Ahab trying to get his whale. And the real damage that was done to him wasn't really addressed, the psychological damage to the man that was done to him. And so I did appreciate that in this, and that they're really addressing that pain, that real deep down the pain that they've both gone through.
Yeah.
The only thing I can add there is I remember the episode I Bored. I will say that I do believe that they kind of touched on Picard's experiences with the Borg here as well, particularly when the crew is starting to bond with Hugh and realize, oh, this isn't just a mindless drone. This person is becoming an individual. He's becoming someone completely different, and they are trying to get Picard to meet with him, to talk with him, because Picard wants to turn him into the virus carrying
Typhoid Mary
weapon.
Yep.
And very much moving forward to do this, and the crew was having second thoughts. And I remember one particular moment where Guinan approaches him and like basically lays it on the line, like, you really need to talk to him. And Picard shouts like, no, because that one moment just always stuck with me.
He needs the separation. Yeah,
I'm about to say that.
Thanks for bringing that up.
In TNG, I think Picard did his best to compartmentalize, and the only time that we saw that he was really especially vulnerable, like I said, were those last 2 minutes of Best Wolf Bruce 2 and in Brothers. Not Brothers, Family. When he goes back to Earth, when he goes back to Earth, and he's at the Chateau Picard with his brother. 24. Hold on, my voice
I was about to say.
Also, Chain of Command, part 1 and 2.
Yeah. Stand by. CTU.
Okay.
I
let's
would like
move.
to go back. I would like to go back just
Yeah, go ahead, son.
and talk about the Elnor line. The it's a lie as a really nice Romulan turnabout of it's a fake.
Good point. Point well taken.
I was wondering if anyone else was going to catch on to that, but yeah, I thought so too. That's hilarious.
Did not even occur to me. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so let's take a little diversion here as we follow Rafi's confrontation with whom we discover to be her son, Gabriel Wong. And a fairly short scene, but man, there's a lot going on there. You get a much clearer sense of sort of the, number one, the depth of her addiction as a disease. Number two, the very real repercussions it had, as we've seen, on her family, her husband we don't know anything about, and of course now her son, who must have been a small child because he looks to be like, what, 25 or something? So 14 years before. Yeah. So he was quite young at the time. We learn about just how deep her obsession with the conspiracy around the synth attack was. And I think the first reference to something specific about her suspicions about the conspiracy, and that is the term the Conclave of Eight reactions. Ross.
Oh my God. I didn't think that the episode could get more intense during the dissection.
It was painful.
But then here she is. She's obviously trying to build up courage to something. And the look on his face when he sees her and he says, Mom, with that tone and that look in her eye, in his eye, and then the appeal, the heartfelt, emotional appeal, followed by a biting cutback. Just this whole scene was so emotionally charged in the same way as the opening, but a very different kind of evisceration. He is brutal with her. He is unrelenting and remorseless in his attack, his verbal attack, that I couldn't help but feel for her, but also him too. It's pretty clear that she had a very hard time dealing with the aftermath of the Mars attack. She was so convinced in her conviction, in her theory, in her idea that it probably had something to do with her being drummed out of Starfleet as well. She wouldn't let go of it. And people who are obsessed to that level often they can't stop thinking of anything else, so they turn to other means of calming their brain down. So it's no wonder she got addicted to something.
I was going to point out that I think that, and this is what I finally figured out here, and this is having dealt with this within my own family, that there's some mental illness going on with Rafi, okay? And people who have mental illness in their family understand that there are degrees to it, okay? And and for many people it's controllable, it's controlled within their life through counseling, through medication, and there's various degrees through to deal with it. And some folks with varying degrees of mental illness are prone to conspiracy theories, and they become obsessive about things, and this is part of the disorder.
This is why we loved George.
Yep.
Well, and I think I think what Raffi is doing, she is the poster child for self-medicating, is what I think she
Yeah.
is. And again, no judgment at all. Again, I've lived through this on both sides of my family, and so I recognize it. And it's one more aspect of the character that makes her so real to me. I love this character. I think she's wonderful. I think she's honest.
She's tragic.
She's tragic, but you know what though? She's human.
Mhm.
And this is what I think this show is doing such a good job with, that I think was often lost on Next Generation and the other Starfleet or Star Trek shows from the era, is that these are not sanitized versions of human beings. These are real. These are people with issues. These are people who are damaged. These are normal people. And I really, again, I really appreciate the path we're being taken on with Raffi, because there's no question at all, there is a conspiracy here, okay? But she has a type of personality that when she finds a conspiracy or thinks there's one, she can't let go of it, and that it just preoccupies her in everything and makes it so she loses her friends, her family, her life, her career. And that's exactly what seems to have happened.
And that comes all together with her son's absolute rejection of her.
Right.
And we finally see the reason that he is on Free Cloud. He has a Romulan wife who is pregnant with their child, and they're at a fertility center.
Yeah, and I got the feeling from her son that it's not that he hates her. There is some resentment there, but his biggest issue with her is, and I know what this is like dealing with my own mother.
Don't ruin their lives too.
It's not so much. It's really, yeah. I mean, look, it comes down to this: is that you're more trouble than you're worth for my family, is what it comes down to. And I hate saying that, but this is. I'm going to be honest with you. This is the problem I have with my own mom. I don't hate my mother, but the issue I have is that the few times she's been around my kids, and Carlos, you're not going to believe this, she's mean to them. And
to your kids?
Can you believe it? I know. And which is a weird thing, because she was never like that to us as kids. But I don't hate my mother. I just recognize that she's not good for my family. The same way that Raffi's son realizes that she's just not good for. You're just not good for us at all. Being a part of my life.
The intensity of his emotion. I think it was more than that. I think there was some genuine hatred there. Because
I didn't get
of
hatred.
The abandonment.
I got deep anger, but I didn't get hatred.
Right.
Okay, anger. I'll anger more than hatred, but there was certainly he didn't want anything to do with her, despite her appeal, despite everything. He did not want her in his life, or in his son's or daughter's life.
Yeah. It's just, and like I said, I can appreciate that. But it's like I said, this all comes down to, again, the excellent job the writers are doing to finding a way to make all these characters appeal to us on different levels. I think it's wonderful.
Well, here's a quick question then, in regards to the scene and the series as a whole. Does the presence of damaged people like Raffi harm the ideals of Star Trek?
No, because I think the reality of it is that Gene Roddenberry never envisioned a future where people were perfect. I think that's more a byproduct of the writing afterward. He envisioned a future where people were trying to make themselves better.
Well, not only that, it is the perfect culmination of what Starfleet is. Even with her addiction, even with her losing everything, her family, her son, her career, she was still allowed to exist within the Federation. She literally had her little pod of a house and her drugs, which she smoked. She was still allowed to exist within the Federation. The Federation was tolerant enough to let her separate herself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's, these, I think that, we're back to what is the main principle of Star Trek? It's not just a piece of jewelry, but infinite diversity through infinite combinations. You know, I mean, there you have it. She's probably one of the most diverse characters we've ever come across.
And that's what
Star Trek.
A lot of the haters do not seem to comprehend. I'm like, that is the fundamental underlying fact of what Star Trek is supposed to be about.
No matter what side of
That's why I asked the question.
no matter what side of the debate you're on as a hater, because I've seen a lot of pro-lefty type stuff that will absolutely rail on anyone who's a Republican and likes Star Trek for god-awful reasons, mostly just because they have the R next to their name. Just for liking Star Trek. You can't like Star Trek and be a Republican. Bullshit. That's the whole point of the Federation.
Yeah, that people have diverse viewpoints. You know, I've always said this about. I don't like to jump into politics about this, but you know, at the end of the day, and I would think that this is back when I was when I was a conservative, considered a conservative. Look, being a parent makes you go very ambivalent in politics. Trust me, it's a great leveler. Anytime you go one way or the other, being a parent changes it all. Things are a lot more ambiguous. But back when I was, I consider myself a conservative. From my perspective on Star Trek, is that like this is how I would like things to be someday. Regardless, I think what Star Trek presents is an end game that we would all love to have, regardless of your political persuasion. I guess the difference would be how people think we should go about getting there.
Raffi was armed, by the way, when Picard came to her.
She was.
That's right. She activated the.
She was ready to shoot him.
That's a very
All right. So in addition to learning her full name, which was Rafaela,
beautiful name,
we switch now over to the big confrontation scene in the bar in Stardust City.
Before we go back to that, the fact that so I want to say that this scene not only was about Raffi, but was probably just a hint at the goings on of the falling apart of the neutral zone. Because you've had these tensions for so many years between humanity and the Romulans, and here's a human and a Romulan having a child, and here they are in probably the only place in the entire quadrant where they can get, some kind of parental
good
help.
point. To do that, yeah.
On a crime world, they've gone to the baby care center because there because there could be any number of basically Romulan miscegenation laws anywhere in the quadrant now that there is no law.
Well, at least in the neutral zone, former neutral zone,
right?
And that's another interesting thing that's been brought up. That the show in these areas where they are running around the former Romulan neutral zone.
Okay, so that's where they were. So that was my next question. Where is this free cloud located? It's in the Romulan neutral zone. Is that where it is?
Well, they aren't super clear about it. We know it's either in or nearby.
It's what Nimbus 3 should have been.
Well, it's in the last episode, they talked about Fenris Ranger territory. What are the Rangers doing? They're trying to establish order in the former neutral zone, or at least parts of it.
Well, but they also called it the worlds that had been abandoned by the Federation. So I think it's potentially more than just the neutral zone.
We're better to resettle Romulans than in disputed Romulan territory.
All right, so the free cloud is in the Alpha Doradus system, which is, according to Memory Alpha, about 169 light years from Earth. So take that information and interpret it as you will.
All I heard from that was the Alpha Dorito system.
That's exactly what I heard too, son. That's exactly what I heard. Okay, well, the problem with that is that if you look at the official galactic map as seen on Deep Space Nine, the Federation is the solar system lies smack dab in the middle of the Beta Quadrant and the Alpha Quadrant, right on the line. So 169 light years either way doesn't really tell you much.
It's
a problem.
Texarkana is what it is.
There you
I
go.
take it to mean that
Perfect.
they're.
It's Texarkana.
I take it to mean that they're in the neutral zone, and I think that is fitting
It makes
for the
sense.
story that's
It
being
certainly,
told.
yeah, it makes
Well,
sense.
I think it's a whole area of space that includes the neutral zone, because Seven talks about it having dissolved, and so it's not just the neutral zone or the former neutral zone. It's
The
that
Star Empire.
adjacent.
Yeah, and I want to
area.
talk about something that was brought up, and this is in the very beginning of the episode in the opening teaser. We've been having a discussion about, do the Romulans even have a government left anymore? And I get the feeling, based upon how people are still concerned about being on the Tal Shiar's hit list, that yes, the Romulans still have some form of a government going on there.
Well, my
in-
guess is that there's more than one.
In Maps
Yeah,
and
I
Legends,
would agree.
in Maps and Legends, they reference the Romulan Free State.
Free state.
Yeah,
right.
that's correct. That's what
so
I think. Right.
That
So
sounds like an offshoot government.
right.
And
Exactly.
then we've got the Romulan Rebirth movement. We know the Tal Shiar still exists, but it might exist extranationally.
Yeah.
Probably now. Yeah.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
the Romulan Star Empire still exists, but at a significantly reduced capability, similar to Rome after the fall of the Empire.
Yeah.
That would
It's-
probably be the most likely.
This is starting to feel so much like Star Trek Online.
It's broken apart so much that the Empire still exists in like its own little capsule, but enough of a capital for the Tal Shiar to still operate outside it and within.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in a better state for the Tal Shiar to operate, since they can be even more authoritarian than before.
Just wait until we find out the leader of the Romulan Rebirth movement is Sita.
I would love that.
Yeah, I actually would love that. I don't think that would be a bad thing. Okay, so it actually makes a lot of sense given her, her background. She would be even more Romulan than a Romulan. Okay, so let's get to the central conflict of this episode, which is the showdown in the bar, in which the jig is up, whereas as Elnor, in yet another cute Elnor moment, says,
Are we done pretending?
Are we done pretending? Yeah, that was it. And we find out a few key things, one of which I think is hilarious because of some of the comments I've heard online about this, and where they discover that the French pirate is actually Admiral Picard, and people have complained, it's like, he's one of the most famous people in the galaxy. How could they not recognize him? It's
He's
like,
one of the most famous Starfleet people in the galaxy. You take
him
away
out
the
of the uniform.
Starfleet uniform, and guess what? He's just an ordinary dude.
He's the
Yeah,
only
pretty
bald
much.
guy in the universe.
So anyway, I thought that was funny, but the fact that his name still carries a lot of weight, even if his visage doesn't. But what's interesting to me also, and this comes, we've gotten a little bit of this in every episode, but it really hits home in this episode and in this scene, although it does almost to some degree as much in the Rafi Gabriel scene, and that's really about how his abandoning, his resigning from Starfleet really fucked up a lot of people's lives, on like a really basic level. I mean, mother and son, where Rafi and Gabriel are concerned. The fact that Seven and Bjayzl, I love that name. Where they hit really strongly at some kind of relationship, possibly romantic, between the two of them, and the rise of the Fenris Rangers, which wouldn't have existed if Starfleet was still, a force for order in that part of the galaxy. All of this, and there was that line in the last episode too, where the head warrior nun said that because it said to Picard, because you could not save everyone, you saved no one, and that's a devastating statement. Actually, if you think about it, in the way of absolute candor. It's a really, really, it's a condemnation, really, the ripple effects of his withdrawal, and we're seeing more and more of those in each successive episode, and on very deep and personal levels for virtually every character that we're coming across.
Did she remind you of Kaiopaka?
Bjayzl?
Not Bjayzl.
No,
Zani.
The head
I was
nun.
about to say.
Zani.
Yeah, a little bit. I love Kaiopaka.
I did
my
too. I
favorite
thought she was
part
great.
about what they did
Wonderful.
is, I forget what they called it. Oh yeah, your paw, and they like
Your
grab
paw.
your ear,
Yep.
and everyone would always be like, "Ow!" Like
Ow.
like your mother was doing it to you.
Right.
That was
Oh,
my favorite part. One
Can
of
we
my
talk
favorite
about
things.
Bjayzl for a minute? Just-
Let's talk about Bjayzl. Start us off, Ross.
well, first off, awesome name.
Yes.
She's very human looking, but the eyes, the demeanor, and the way she just immediately reads people, I'm thinking Betazoid.
Yeah,
you
she
think
got
so?
that exotic.
Well,
look
she
to her,
does
don't
look
she?
like Marina Sirtis. So
Well, no, it's
anything's
the
possible.
eyes.
Yeah,
The
that-
eyes have always been kind of the defining physical feature of the Betazoids. That kind of deep, dark, almost black that you look into, and
Yeah.
you just kind of lose yourself in this hypnotic
thank you,
gaze.
Yeah, well, now she looks like a busted jar of ragu, but okay.
Yeah, literally. Oh my God.
But
So
when
I'm
she's
interested in this.
when she's in control of
Yeah.
everything. And when Picard pulls the hood back from Seven, and her expression doesn't change a lot, but enough to see that there's this predatory longing, that this is a prey that she has sought for so long, and that she knows. And when she starts speaking and she says Annika, you think, oh shit, something really, really different is happening here. And I don't. It's fun to imagine.
And you wonder why she
former-
doesn't go by that name anymore. Now you
It's
know
fun to
why.
imagine that there might be something romantic there, but this is something else.
I think they pretty heavily hint at it.
Wait a
maybe,
minute.
but this strikes me more as more predatory, more primal.
Yeah, I agree.
Those two
This
things are
was-
not at odds. Those two things are not at odds with each other.
Maybe.
Those two concepts.
I just noticed something. Okay, so you guys have been talking about she looks like Marina Sirtis. She looks like Marina Sirtis, but also the childlike Empress because of the outfit, the way the outfit is. She looks kind of like the childlike Empress from the Neverending Story. At least the movie.
Okay. Yeah, I get that.
I don't think her costumes are quite as form-fitting, but
Also, I just saw this on Twitter. Also, Magenta from Rocky Horror.
Yes.
Yes, I do see that. I do see that. It was actually a brilliant costume. It was more than one costume too, by the way.
It was several.
It was several, but they
I
all
gotta be-
were
I
very
gotta be
thematically
honest.
related.
She was complicated and deliciously villainous, and I was kind of sad to see her explode at the end. I was like, I would like to see this villain show up again.
Yes, but it was also very satisfying.
That's a
Of
good
course, I
question.
agree with that.
Let me run that past Kate for a second. Kate, tell me what you think about Bjayzl. Tell me what you think about the end of Bjayzl. Do you think it was justified? Should she have stuck around to live again another day? How did those scenes resonate for you?
I love how well established she was for a one episode
Yeah.
character.
Mhm.
You know, we get the hint of her name in that first horrible scene, and then it kind of builds over time with her taking more and more dramatic steps, and the showdown with her and Seven is excellent because of the subtext, like you picked up on, Carlos, that there's very likely a much closer relationship between them than just having worked together or had similar ideals. But I think she was also very predatory. She saw somebody she could take advantage of for her own ends, and she's a master manipulator. And so I was sorry to see her go, but at the same time, I feel like she was such a strong character that if they'd kept her, it would have sidetracked the entire show from being about Picard's
point.
journey to Seven's journey.
Mhm.
Good point.
And as
Good point.
awesome as Seven's journey would be, I think they needed to kind of wrap that up to move it on.
Well,
Yeah.
isn't that the truth about any Seven story that we've ever seen in Star Trek? She
Yeah.
tends to she tends to draw everything into herself like gravity.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting
Yeah.
observation.
That's true.
I think you're right. There's something about her that has always been like this lightning rod of attention. So yeah, definitely.
Well, that goes back to
definitely
Carlos's theory that 7 of 9 is an artificial Romulan singularity.
that's how the whole damn show is powered.
I mean,
You know,
this
here's the
episode was
thing,
practically and effectively hijacked by her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
really was.
It's what you've always said, son. The Romulans are extra.
But
So is
yeah,
Seven.
they are. They're so extra. But you know, after I'm watching this clip down here again that Justin keeps showing us by my ragu scene. Okay, and I'm starting to I'm reminded of the fact that this may not be the last we see of her, and I'll tell you why. Gambit Part 1 and 2, TNG. Okay, they made a point in this episode, right before this scene where Seven comes in and goes dual wields guns blazing, that everybody else in there, for the most part, they were getting their asses beamed out of their emergency beam outs real quick there. You're telling me she's the only one that doesn't have the ability to do an emergency beam out? I find this unlikely. So I get a funny feeling that the moment that weapon discharged, that she got zapped out of there, just like Picard did in Gambit, and whatever was left in her place to look like ragu was there to as a decoy. And
I will
Okay,
say,
let's
I
do a
love
quick-
it that the pianist is one of the people that made the emergency
Yep.
beam out.
Yeah, I love that too. And the bartender as well. Let's do a
That
quick
Don't
is
shoot me.
straight out of Star Trek Klingon.
Yeah.
Well, and also that's a Billy Joel reference. Don't shoot me, I'm just a piano player. So there you go.
So that's a very good observation. I want to do a quick lightning round poll of everybody. Did Bjayzl die? Ross, yay or nay?
Yes.
Justin.
I think so. I mean, it's just, the way they played the scene out, it just really didn't look like it was the last minute save. Now, not saying that we might see her as a clone later on. But.
Clone schmone. Wrong show. Index.
No.
Yes.
Shawn, you're a no, clearly.
I have convinced myself that she's still alive because I want to.
Okay. Travis.
Yes.
Yes, she's a goner. And Kate.
That is Icheb.
Dead as Icheb. I'm gonna come in on that too. So we're 5-2. And I think the reason for that, even though you make a plausible case, Shawn, is exactly the reason that Kate gave, which is it makes it Seven's story instead of Picard's story.
Yeah.
I have another reason to agree as well, and that is, I think the pre-established, to agree with you guys, I think the pre-established narrative here that they have a deeper relationship here, no matter how abusive it was or whatever the case, the fact that they have a deeper relationship, I think Bjayzl didn't think that Seven would actually go through with it. There's a possibility that's.
I think that's true too. I think that's true too. She definitely, and that's actually an argument against what you're saying, because Bjayzl, remember, according to the occluded personnel files that Rafi hacked into, she has an entire army working for her.
Right.
She doesn't feel like she needs a personal beam out. She's got people for that.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of fall on the yes.
She had the
dead.
big lizard man for that.
Yeah, Mr.
Anybody else get a Bortus feeling from that guy?
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what I
kind
thought
of.
whenever I seen him. I'm like, oh God, they ripped off Bortus.
Yeah, the star of the Orville. Yes, Bortus.
I don't think you can claim that they've ripped off Bortus when Bortus is a ripoff of
Really?
Worf. So
Of course.
Yeah, true.
I don't think that's how that works. Okay, so let's move on to what I think is a scene we saw foreshadowed earlier. We finally see it play out, in which we really see what the connection is between Picard and Seven, and where they talk about. Where she asks him, as you may recall, whether or not he felt he gained his humanity back after he was separated from the collective. And at first he says yes, and then she says 100%, and then he says no.
No.
And then he goes even further to saying builds a bridge, or points out that there's a bridge between the two of them, in which he points out, that they're working on that, basically.
Right, exactly.
And by the
Work in
way,
progress.
I love the music cue in this. This scene, the music cue, it just made it pop. It was so nice.
The music.
The beam out, you mean?
The music cue for this beam out and their conversation is literally the Voyager theme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly.
Voyager
Yeah,
/
no,
First Contact.
it was a really nice touch, and it was a really kind of poignant arrangement of it, even though it was just kind of a sting of it. It was very effective. I personally really loved it. She leaves him the little calling card or transmitter or whatever it is, the Fenris Ranger transmitter, which to me that was the button that says yes, we're going to see her again.
Yep.
Here's my business card.
Yeah.
Well, more than just that scene, that whole connection was built up in the scene prior, as Seven, takes charge of everything and is ready to either wring out B'Jazel's neck or shoot her on sight, surrounded by everybody, as he's trying to appeal to her to not go through with her revenge, because he's been through it too, not just with his experience with the Borg through First Contact, where he's ready to sacrifice himself, the Enterprise, and everything to kill the Borg then and there. But
and yet we find out that she actually, as she put it earlier, was not entirely candid with him. She does go through with the revenge, but I thought it was interesting that even in doing so, she acknowledged that it was important to let Picard believe that he had convinced her.
Right.
That because hope and mercy are still an important
That
part of
is
what
a
the
great
universe
line.
needs.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree.
I
I also
love
wanted
and
to.
it's also very on point for 7 of 9.
Yep.
One thing I think a lot of people either forgets or overlook is that 7 was never Starfleet. And that was always a point of contention between her and Janeway, that she was her own person, she was developing on her own, but she's always been a little on the heartless side, even
She
as
lacked
she was
empathy.
discovering her humanity.
Yeah, she lacked empathy for a very, very, very long time.
And even then, with the loss of Icheb and the toll it took on her, it is very much on character for 7 to kind of cast aside a piece of her humanity to settle this score, to get justice for Icheb, and then completely murder her way out of there.
Well, yeah.
And if you remember, there was a scene on Voyager where she actually shocked a Herosian through the communication line in order to prove a point.
Yeah. But more important, I was going to point out there's an episode of Voyager where she's been violated by somebody they came across to get Borg implants out of her, and it causes a serious, it really damages her. I mean, it really hurts her psychologically and emotionally. And you guys remember this episode?
That was the episode where they were testing the isokinetic cannon.
Okay.
Turns out that
I love that you know that.
I think she might be making that up. It is Voyager we're talking about.
Turns out that
say that.
No, that's a literal thing. They were testing a new weapon for
literal
Voyager.
thing, Sean.
He was an arms dealer, was he not?
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was an
Okay,
arms
thank
dealer.
you. All right.
Okay. So let's go back to the episode we're actually talking about. One quick thing, technical thing that I don't know if they've done this in all of the transporter effects, but this is the first time I've ever seen it. If you look, they have a close-up of Seven's pants as the transporter effect is happening. And, you know, normally the transporter effects are just sort of lights superimposed over the bodies and the bodies fade out. If you look carefully, go, you know, pull it up and you'll see it. You actually see that her pants melt away with the beams of light. Watch. Yeah, you might need to see it bigger on a bigger screen because you can't quite see it there. But because you have to look really closely and you see that the brown of the pants just kind of, it's not just light.
It like
superimposed on it.
streaks. It like streaks away. Like
Yes, like
they're
it-
literally tearing them off.
like a fountain. It like
I think
demolectralizes.
the Kelvin movies included an effect like
I was
that.
gonna say the same thing. I do believe that is a holdover, a very cool transporter holdover from the Kelvin.
And
I'll
I'd have to
have to
look
check that. I hadn't
again,
seen
but
it
I
in any
think
of the
Discovery
shows.
did as well.
Yeah, I think that's
I like
possible.
I like how she takes a down payment for her new starship in the form of two phases.
This is the one.
I love it.
See,
That's
Yep,
great.
yep, there it is. There it is.
Yep.
I'm not seeing it.
It's watch it on a screen with a higher resolution. You'll see it. You know, I saw it on a 4K and it was really clear. So, okay.
And
So anyway,
I'm gonna suggest here that those phaser rifles, within the next 48 hours, you will see 3D prints of them available.
yes,
I'm
on
just-
eBay, probably from China.
They're-
Don't get them from
Ryan,
Wish.com.
I guarantee Ryan Selly already has the 3D files.
Probably.
He's
I
like a
don't actually like the
machine.
look of them.
Oh, I love them. I
but,
think they're great. They're compact. They're cool.
I
Anyway.
like the actual phaser that she had at the beginning of the episode. Really, what she
That was a
used
cool
to
phaser.
shoot each with.
Honestly, it looked more like a Romulan phaser to me. Like a
For a moment, I thought it was, but really it reminded me of an old school, like the assault phaser style from
Really?
Mhm.
Star Trek
No,
6. and Star
wait,
Trek
are you
5.
talking about the hand phaser she shot Icheb with, or
Yes.
the?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
it
looked like a
looked
Star
Starfleet to
design.
me.
Yeah, it looked like maybe something out of Star Trek 2.
Could've been,
Maybe
could've
right
been.
on in there.
Well, I
Okay, let's move into the end game of the episode, and that's where we finally get some information out of Bruce Maddox, key information out of Bruce Maddox. Among them, his acknowledgement of Daj, of having created Daj,
Mhm.
and something that we talked about way back in episode 1. You'll recall when we had our little debate over whether Daj had a real mom, and we find out conclusively that she did not. And that he said that her embedded mom AI wouldn't have activated her unless she'd been in danger, which meant that
Right.
the mom was a total fake. And you saw that, remember I talked about the glitch when she asked about,
No, we knew that. Right.
yeah,
Well, just the
So-
voice shift, like I mentioned.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, now we have a name for it. It's the mom AI. And
I
that
was
is
right.
what,
I was right. I was
We
right.
all called that one,
was
I think.
right.
Well,
No,
I thought it was
no.
pretty.
I literally said it was a separate entity, and Carlos was absolutely staunchly for that. It was probably Maddox controlling it.
I don't know if I said it was him directly controlling it.
I
I
can
did object to it being a
slightly
separate
remember
entity
that.
because, in fact,
You
it's
did.
not a separate. It's embedded in.
It's
in Dot,
embedded,
so
but it is a separate
that
AI
means it's not.
entity.
That's splitting hairs. Okay, let's move on to the last part of the show, and then we've got the episode, and then we've got the SmackDown to do. So, so a key thing that happens here, which gets to things that we had speculated about in previous episodes, and that is the status of Dr. Girardi. We find out before she makes her move against Maddox, we find out the reason for Daj and Soji's existence, or at least why they were sent to Earth
Their
and
mission.
to the artifact, their mission, which was to find out the truth about what was behind the ban on the artificial life forms. And that that both the Zhat Vaj and the Federation appeared to be playing roles
Starfleet.
behind that.
Starfleet, not the Federation.
No, I
said
thought he said
Starfleet.
Federation. I think he said Federation.
I believe he said
I-
Federation.
He said
99%
Federation.
Federation.
Yeah, you said
He
Federation.
said Federation. Yeah,
Okay.
because I wrote this down.
You were
as I was
thinking
watching.
of Tal Shiar. You mentioned Tal Shiar, not the Jacques Vage, but yeah, he mentioned Tal Shiar in the Federation.
Yeah, he didn't say Jacques Vage in this, but he did say Federation. He just said
Well, up till now, the only
Romulans
person
or
who knew about
whatever.
the Jacques Vache was Laris.
Right. So
Mhm.
that
Of the
makes
cast.
sense. So now we move to Girardi, and my first question was, why did they even leave him in her care to begin with? She's not an MD. She's a cyberneticist.
Thank you.
And they should have turned it over to the EMH. This is exactly the kind of thing an EMH is for. So that was kind of a weird plot hole for me. I mean, they did sort of foreshadow it before when the EMH shows up, and what is the nature of your psychological or psychiatric emergency, which I thought was cool. I think I'm gonna start saying that to people in real life. What is it?
Yeah, this EMH apparently has built-in sensors, unlike the ones before. So that's what I
It
got.
uses the ship's internal sensors, I imagine.
Yeah,
which is very cool.
because they're all based on Rios, so naturally they would be on all the time because Rios, they appear whenever they're needed. He doesn't have to call them up. But anyway, so I had a real problem with how she was able to get her way into killing him in the first place, but she does. And
Spoilers.
which means which I guess it wasn't. Was anyone surprised that this happened?
Told you
Nope,
so.
I can't say I was
Told you,
surprised,
told you.
but I still want to say, damn you, Joe Diaz.
I was surprised
before I
by
did.
the brutality of it. Because you
Yeah,
think that someone who apparently cared for him would find a more merciful way to do it. But he died in agony.
That was
Yeah.
brutal. That was
That was brutal.
I want to point out,
Well-
here's how I saw the scene, okay? I saw the scene like this. I said, oh, good. It looks like there's only about a minute 44 left in this entire episode. So please, dear God, please don't let her kill her. Shit, she just fucking killed him. And that's pretty much how it went. Like, we all saw it coming, but the questions that it raises is, I think we figured, I mean, there were hints all over
It
the damn
raises
episode.
more than it answers, frankly.
Yeah, because she was we knew, the side eyes that she kept giving throughout the episode. Number one, okay, it's like it made it obvious that she was that there's something nefarious going on here.